Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're stepping into a time machine and heading straight for one of the absolute most volatile, transformative, and frankly just fascinating eras in human history. We are looking at the years sandwiched right between two massive global cataclysms, the First and Second World Wars. This was a time when the world was quite literally a crucible, melting down all those old traditions and forging entirely new ways of seeing reality. And as you'll see today, the literature of this period, it wasn't just a mirror reflecting the chaos. It was this incredible cast of brilliant, sometimes tortured minds, literally trying to write their way out of the dark.
Now, before we really get moving, I've got to loudly and proudly give credit where credit is due. The incredibly rich material we're breaking down in today's Explainer was prepared by the brilliant folks over at the Department of English at Odisha State Open University. It's always such a privilege to unpack high-quality, rigorously researched stuff like this, and their work provides the absolute perfect foundation for our deep dive today.
Okay, so let's dive right into our roadmap. First, we'll look at the interwar disillusionment. Then, W.H. Auden's poetic precision, Isherwood observing a society of flame, Waugh's satire and spiritual decay, and finally, the era's enduring legacy. All right, Section 1, the interwar disillusionment. To really understand these writers, you've got to understand the ground literally crumbling beneath their feet. We start in 1918, right at the end of the First World War. The sheer trauma and devastation of trench warfare, it completely shattered the old world order. So the 1920s become this desperate search for new meaning, which gives rise to modernism. But peace was, well, incredibly fragile. By the 1930s, the whole globe is plunged into the economic nightmare of the Great Depression, while at the exact same time, the dark shadows of fascism start creeping across Europe. All of this rapid, chaotic marching leads directly to 1939 and the onset of the Second World War. Just imagine being a writer in this window. Traditional values are dead, economic collapse is everywhere, and another huge war is looming. It created this profound collective crisis of identity. Now, what's really interesting here is the distinct artistic breaking point it shows. Traditional literature, it relied on conventional structures, neat storytelling, and historically, kind of a glorification of conflict. But in the interwar period, that simply didn't make sense anymore. I mean, how do you write a neat, tidy story when the whole world is in pieces? Well, you don't. You get modernism. Writers completely broke away from traditional forms. They started experimenting with fragmented narratives, deep individual perception, and stream of consciousness to actually reflect a fractured post-war reality. Moving on to Section 2, W.H. Auden and Poetic Precision. Auden was a towering figure who navigated this era's chaos through fierce intellect. His unique identity as a writer was defined by a truly powerful combination. He wasn't just writing pretty verses, he had this master's grip on strict poetic forms, like sonnets and heavily structured poems, and he basically weaponized that technical precision with deep philosophical inquiry. He drew on classical literature, psychoanalysis, and theology to directly address the political and spiritual crises happening around him. He was essentially trying to diagnose the modern world's illness through poetry. And his life beautifully tracks the anxieties of the era. Back in the 1930s, his work was intensely political. He was acutely aware of the rise of fascism in Europe, even traveling to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, which massively influenced his writing. But 1939 marks a huge pivot. He moves to the United States, and we see a real thematic evolution. He returns to his Christian faith, moving away from purely political solutions to explore faith, love, and human responsibility. This brings us to two masterpieces, September 1, 1939, which is an incredible meditation on the outbreak of World War II, and The Age of Anxiety, a long poem exploring the existential dilemmas of the modern world. That one actually won him the Pulitzer Prize in 1948. This brings us to Section 3, Christopher Isherwood Observing a Society of Flame. While Auden diagnosed the world through philosophy, Isherwood took an intensely observational approach. So the crucial point is this. Isherwood wasn't just a chronicler of political collapse. The man was an absolute trailblazer. As an openly gay man in an era of immense, widespread prejudice, his writing did something incredibly risky and profoundly important. He challenged taboos head-on. He provided visibility and empathy to queer experiences when mainstream literature was largely ignoring or vilifying them. His own personal authenticity literally became a powerful form of artistic rebellion. Let's walk through his literary journey. First up, we have the Berlin Stories. Immersed in the Weimar Republic, which was Germany's fragile democratic government back in the late 20s and early 30s, Isherwood brilliantly captured a society basically dancing on the edge of a volcano. He chronicled the decadence, the despair, and the fragile beauty right before the shadow of Nazism fell. After moving to the US, much like Auden did, Isherwood underwent a massive shift, delving deeply into Eastern spirituality under the mentorship of Swami Prabhavananda. And this spiritual journey culminated in his 1964 masterpiece, A Single Man. It follows just a single day in the life of a gay English professor mourning his partner, and it is a devastatingly beautiful, groundbreaking exploration of grief, resilience, and LGBTQ+ lives. On to Section 4, Evelyn Waugh, Satire and Spiritual Decay. If Auden was the philosopher and Isherwood the observer, well, Waugh was the cynic who sought moral refuge from all the absurdity. And this visual beautifully illustrates the deep contrast between the two halves of his career. On one side, his early years were marked by a wild, almost grotesque humor. On the other side, a profound, very serious quest for spiritual grounding. Let's break that down. Waugh's early novels, like Decline and Fall and A Handful of Dust, are completely legendary for their dark, biting humor. He had this razor-sharp eye for human folly and the utter hypocrisy of high society. But beneath all the jokes, there was a deep personal dissatisfaction. A really painful divorce left him searching, which led to his conversion to Roman Catholicism in 1930. He was basically looking for a rigid moral framework in a world he felt had gone entirely mad. And this fundamentally shifted his writing. His later masterpieces, like The Incredible Brideshead Revisited and his WWI's Sword of Honor trilogy, they trade that sheer dark comedy for profound explorations of faith, redemption, and what he viewed as cultural and spiritual decay. Finally, Section 5, The Era's Enduring Legacy. So why does this specific pocket of literary history still matter so much to us today? Well, the collective trauma of the interwar period forced an incredible diversity of brilliant innovations. You had the political and philosophical poetry of writers like Auden. You had the vital queer visibility and social documentation of Isherwood. You had the biting satire and religious exploration of Waugh. And concurrent with all of this, entirely new genres were booming just to help people cope, like the intricate detective novels by Agatha Christie and early science fiction exploring the perils of totalitarianism. This era didn't just survive the chaos, it pushed the very boundaries of language and form to capture the modern human experience, laying the groundwork for the contemporary literature we read right now. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought. These interwar writers were responding to pandemics, economic crashes, shifting identities, and the constant threat of global conflict. Sound familiar at all? We are living through our own era of profound global anxiety right now. The resilience and creativity of Auden, Isherwood, and Waugh prove that the most fractured times often produce the absolute most vital, groundbreaking art. So what you should take away from this is not just history, but a real lens for today. As we face our own modern crises, who are the writers documenting our fractured world, and what new forms will they invent to help us survive it? Keep your eyes open. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.